Today we're going to do a RHEL 8 workshop. Before we do that, if we just go around the room and everyone say their name.
Name is Will. I work in the DoD primarily with computer security research and embedded devices. My background has been that for 20 plus years.
Awesome.
I'm Mark. I'm the organizer of KeyLUG. I also work in cybersecurity and have been working with Linux since for about 15 years and enjoy it very much.
So if you look at the screen right now, you'll see that there's my flavor of this RHEL 8 workshop that was forked from Ted Brunel's flavor of the RHEL 8 workshop, which actually was forked from the upstream work that was done at Summit this year in May. One takeaway, that's continuing to be work, so that will be able to be offered as a bunch of virtual machines for a student on Amazon. I didn't do that today. I wanted to make sure you guys could install this locally on VMs on your workstations, and then you could run through these exercises as much as possible. So the exercises you'll find out aren't going to work 100% with a single virtual machine. There's going to be maybe 5% of things that just aren't going to happen. But 95% of it does actually behave as stated. One of the other things, if you look at my repository, I have the RHEL 8 workshop sort of discussion on how to install a minimal VM, what commands you'll need to run to subscribe to the Red Hat content and pull all the updates down to prepare to run the workshop. And then there's within this repo, there's a single script you're going to run that will prepare the workshop and set everything up for you with all the exercises and all the things you're going to do. Couple of notes here. You'll notice in the subscription manager commands, there's actually three streams you're going to enable. So the first two repos are RHEL 8 repos. They're required for RHEL 8 to operate. One is the base OS. So we separated with RHEL 8 base operating system functionality, which you see here, from things that are application streams. So an application stream is sort of the next iteration of the Red Hat software collections library, where folks that install RHEL, because it has a 10 to 13 year lifespan, aren't really happy they're running Tomcat 6, 7 years down the road. So this allows you through the AppStream process to upgrade or install newer applications on the base OS without interfering and conflicting with the base OS. So we'll see that in the exercises. You'll install a version of Postgres, then you'll remove it and install an older version of Postgres. All that will work correctly, so it will let you do that. And then we also add the Ansible channel so we can install some of the tooling to set up the workshop. Tmux is installed. I never really used it much doing these exercises, but it is a useful tool for maintaining screen sessions when you disconnect from a remote machine. Because everything's running on my laptop as a VM, I didn't have VMs going down where that was an issue or losing connections. But if you are working with remote systems, that can be very helpful. I think we had a recent talk on Tmux, and what was the other one? Screens?
Screens, yes.
Yeah. So Tmux is sort of the newer flavor of that. Folks that are happy with screens will probably stay with screens, but if you want to use the terminal mux, you can do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead, and then at the bottom of this, once you run through these scripts to set up your workshop and get everything installed, we can go into the workshop itself. So just a quick check, are you just at the beginning of VM installation?
Yeah, it's about done.
Okay. So you probably got about another 15, 20 minutes before this is all set up. But I'm going to go ahead and start walking through some exercises.
Okay.
Just to show you what some of this stuff does. The nice thing about these labs, so you click the link on the bottom. These are the folks that built this for Summit. There's some introductory discussions here, some notes on how they mark things, so you understand what the instructions mean. And this is very much, work at your own pace. So there's 12 exercises here. They're all pretty independent of each other. 8 does flow into 9. The rest of them I think you can do in any order. It doesn't really matter. Workshop preparation, if you ran the script, you could skip. So you don't actually need that. There is some good notes in workshop preparation on some of the key bindings for Tmux. So if you want to use Tmux and learn a little bit more about that, you can. So we're going to go to the web consoles where we're going to start. A couple of notes here. So this is something that's been heavily engineered for RHEL. So a lot of investment and time and money went into the web console to improve the user experience and make a lot of the common system admin tasks more web friendly. So binding or doing bonded network interfaces, things like that. It's getting point and clicky now. It's a lot less complicated than it used to be with about 1,000 options on a command line. So there's a lot of stuff they're trying to do to make easier for the users. So if I click on so how many of you guys have worked with RHEL 8 already, or you've been doing it? So this is all for the
Yeah,
folks.
one of my dev environments.
This is all for the folks at home, is what we're saying. All right. So Web Console allows you to do a large number of things here. You can manage your services, manage accounts. You'll see the list here. You can create sauce reports. There's quite a bit that they have available. Now, one thing you'll notice is that when we browse to the Web Console, it's going to have some features missing. So we're going to go ahead and install some of the capabilities that we need here. So I'm going to just type these commands. And I'm connected to my virtual machine here, so I can just do a terminal session. So this is going to talk about Cockpit, or a node example, whatever. We don't really have that running, so what we're going to do is open a tab. It's going to be HTTPS, whatever your virtual machine's IP address is, port 99. And then it's going to have a self-signed signature, which you got to get past. Login as root, which unlocks a lot of the functionality. When you set up the workshop, the passwords are going to be R3DH4T, so Red Hat with a 3 and a 4. That'll be for both the student user as well as the root user. Let me zoom in a little bit here so you guys can see this. So what you're seeing under System is some graphs showing you how things are running. And you'll notice that there's no way to persist this information, so we don't have an option to actually record this. I can also click on Dashboard. So Dashboard is something we can customize, and I can see the same sort of statistics if I scroll around or click on these different tabs. You also notice a list of servers down here. So the plus, although I only have the one running, the plus allows you to add additional servers that you want to monitor from this console and see what's going on. There are packages you'll have to install on those servers to gather that information, but it's pretty straightforward. So here I have the system, so we'll go back to the instructions and see what it wants us to do. So it talks about adding additional systems. It talks about installing Cockpit if you don't have it set up. This was done by the Ansible playbook that prepares the workshop, but if not, it's just a handful of commands to enable this. And it tells us to log in as root, walks us around. So now we're going to enable persistent metrics. So on that screen, I don't have the ability to save these metrics anywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and run these commands to enable persistent metrics. So I'm going to create or install the Performance Copilot and then restart the socket for that service. So do this. Give it a second here. Depends how fast the internet is and what we're doing. I think the streaming is probably interfering with my ability to run commands. So I'll give this a couple of seconds. So this was offered as a workshop at Summit. They are working to make this something that will run within a web environment. So you can use AWS, I think is what they're targeting right now. So now that we've installed this Performance Copilot and restarted it, if I go over here and refresh the, well actually you gotta reconnect, it's gonna force me to reconnect. So root. And you'll see I now have a store metrics option that wasn't there before at the bottom. So if I go ahead and click that, I now have persisted metrics for my console. So we can also change the performance profile. So there are some standard, and this has to do with the tune daemon. So out of the box, it tries to determine what you're doing. So right now I'm running under the virtual guest performance profile. If I click that, there are a bunch of other performance profiles I can choose. So you can read through these. There's quite a bit you can do. I'm going to do throughput performance. It shouldn't really break anything when I'm running a VM, but you can basically switch between these easily at the web console and see what effect that has on your system. So we're just going to walk through some of the other features here. You can also look at logs. So if I click on logs, I have the ability to filter, sort, isolate. So right now I'm saying error and above. I can turn everything on by saying debug and above. I can isolate to a specific service like the kernel. I can say, show me everything. So this is all logs being logged wherever. I can filter this, going back to error and above.
I have a question on that, if you don't mind me asking. So for the log reporting that you have in the console, is that for a remote machine, is that pulling that log to a local instance?
So that's a good question. I think if you connect to a remote machine that you're monitoring, you're going to be able to do a lot of this stuff. It depends on what is turned on or what's installed in that remote machine to support these features. Because I'm not sure what the communication mechanism Cockpit's using when it talks to a remote machine. So it's what ports are open or what firewall settings. And I'd have to drill into that myself. But and like I said, this lab as we're running it today, it's only for the one VM. I think if you look in the instructions for the lab, they do have in some of those exercises, connect to this machine, connect to this machine, do this. So you will see different behavior. I just don't have that turned on or enabled. Okay. That's a good question. So we can walk through this. I'm not necessarily going to go through their list on the command here. If you look at networking, like I mentioned, you can see that you're able to, disable your firewall, check your firewall rules. You can add a bonded interface, add teams, bridges, VLANs. You can look at the logs that are going on. If I click on firewall, it shows me which zones are active, which services are allowed. I can add services. I can open ports. So all this can be done through the web interface. Accounts, so I can look at people's capabilities. I can lock them. I can set them to never lock. I can set their passwords to never expire. I can force a change to their password, add keys, add new users to the system. Services, you have full control of the services, which is really getting into the system D capability, but I can look at everything that's defined as far as targets, which ones are enabled, which ones aren't enabled. We're going to go ahead, I'm going to go to system services, and we're going to turn on NTP. So let me look. It's not current, it is running. I must have did this already. So the network time service is running. I can also set that to allow out through the firewall. Let's see, session reporting is another thing. So session reporting is pretty interesting. And this gets into the terminal logging stuff, which is a different exercise. But it will record not only the keystrokes and the command outputs, but if they resize their screen, if they do any of that, you can actually see all that when you replay the sessions. So any user connecting to your system that has a terminal that they resize or do anything like that, you can actually see all those events at the same time that they were playing out as they were doing it. So the session recording creates JSON log files. They're quite extensive. It records all the events that the system's able to capture, and you can have full replay capability.
Is that enabled by default?
That's a great question. So I think if you go to the terminal logging, there is stuff you have to install to enable that. And as an example, I'm going to log out for a second. I'll show you guys something.
Sorry about all the questions.
No, this is great.
Security
So if I log
standpoint.
out and I log back in, so I'm going to SSH back in here as student. Student's one of the unprivileged users that are defined. He's got the same. What do you see at the bottom here on the screen?
Yep.
So they are notified that their session is being recorded. So everything they do, a record is being held that's accessible via the web console. If I go to the session recording, look what I see here. It's the actual recording of the session. And I can play this. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to resize this. LSETC shadow. I'm going to say no. Oh no, let's see if we can cap this. It should give me an error. Okay. And then I'm going to exit as the students. That'll terminate the session. If I go back here and hit play, so while I was talking to you, all that time was it knew how long I was on the system. And then eventually it's going to show you the things I was doing as the student. So it's 38 seconds, we're about halfway there, so it should show some activity soon. But this does fully record everything that they were doing, and you can of course replay this quicker. So you'll see that it just changed the size of the font because I resized my terminal. And now it's replaying the commands that I typed where I was trying to look at the shadow password file, got an error, and then I logged out. And that's the end of the session. So you can actually, and then you can rewind and look at this again. You're making a face like, not that useful, maybe useful.
No comment.
No comment. So I'm sure there's products in this space that have different features and capabilities. But
Is this like a text log you can grep?
yeah, so
if you want to?
it's actually put there are files that are captured on the system. I'm not exactly it mentions it in the workshop exercises where this is being stored,
Okay.
and you can definitely take a look at all that. Let's see, we talked about network management. I already have the NTP capability, session management. So there's quite a bit here to go through these exercises, get a little more familiar with the operating system.
It
I
even
just think it's
includes,
interesting that they have all that, 'cause it's almost incorporating tripwire and some other stuff and like SE Linux
It is.
into
You know, it's probably like it's baked into the operating system. There's no additional thing to purchase. There's no additional thing to configure other than installing the packages that support it. So
Mhm.
from a system admin standpoint, you can stand up RHEL 8 and enable session logging without having to install yet another application or configure something or figure all that out. So
Yeah, right now in the environments, I mean, it's, generally speaking, that's never enabled. Like, you do not see session logging typically on Linux boxes. Like, it just doesn't happen.
just because they don't want to or they don't.
They don't know how to.
Okay.
Like, you think about SE Linux, I mean, you might see somebody mess with an SE Linux profile, but not very often. Most of the time it's set in just log, it's not set into deny mode. So seeing this, I mean, that's a change institutionally for Linux. I mean, typically the way to do things.
Oh no, absolutely. I think the web console's a change institutionally for
Yeah.
Linux and how you do things. I don't know if it's more the Windowsification of things.
Well, I think if you're working in, the defensive portion of security, this enables somebody that doesn't have the technical expertise to do much more monitoring than they could previously.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. So a lot of these exercises are sort of like that, right? You're gonna just try different commands, experiment with different features and capabilities of the OS. So we can look at systemd next. So systemd is a replacement for the upstart init scripts that were in previous releases of RHEL. Some people love it, some people hate it. I don't think there's a whole lot of middle of the roaders out there. I think a lot of the concerns are sort of being remediated. I don't know if it's as much of a pushback as it was before. One of the biggest things that this did, so if you look at the old init system, there were a series of scripts that were run sequentially at boot time.
Yep.
What they recognized is that a lot of that stuff could happen in parallel, and it greatly sped up the boot process when you run systemd to determine what the real dependencies are, what the tree structure is, and then just run things in parallel as much as possible. So you can get, a few seconds and then you're fully up and booted. One of the challenges though is there's a lot of binary code involved here. Scripts were more understandable to folks. They could see exactly what was going on. There's a lot of hidden behavior and command line options and things that you got to adjust and get used to. So I think those are the biggest differences between this and why there was some pushback for systemd. Again, this is going to constantly mention node1example.com or node2example.com. You're talking to whatever the IP address is for your virtual machine. These check host tests are gonna fail. So in the workshop, there's frequently these commands you're supposed to run to make sure you're on the right host before you do anything else. Those will not work, so just be aware that running on a VM, you're not gonna be able to do the capabilities that are listed. Alright, so we're gonna log back in as root here. And I'm actually gonna run some of these commands. We'll clear the screen and I will do a systemd analyze. So it'll tell me how long it took the system to start up, where the time was spent, what target I'm running. So the multi-user target, there's also there's several other targets. There's a graphical user interface target. These are all intended to replace what were commonly known as the run levels in prior releases of the system. I can do a blame. I want to know why this took so long to boot. So if I do systemd-analyze blame, it tells me exactly where it spent all its time during the boot process, and I can see if there's any services that are starting up that are hanging or having some issues, and try to determine what's going on.
Looks like it pipes it through less or something similar to that.
Yeah, it's actually running it through that sort of that journal control interface where it has sort of the line numbers, and then you can kind of walk it and then hit Q.
Yeah.
Let's see. So there's some discussion on how systemd looks at the world. There's this concept of units. Units define objects. The most common type is a service. A unit file is configuration that stores information about how to start this thing, its dependencies. The default ones are in the user lib systemd system directory, as seen on the bottom there. The ones you override are in the etc systemd system directory. So here we have different targets: multi-user target, graphical target, and it says how they equate to the different run levels. You can always see what your target is using system control is the command you use to interact with systemd. And I can say get the default, and it says my default is multi-user target. I can also list the services that are running. So if I say system control type service, it'll give me a list of all the services, whether they're loaded, if they're active. And then I can list the unit files. So for some of the folks here in the room, this is probably pretty basic stuff. This is the intent of this session. I was talking to Mark, and this is probably something we can discuss as well. So you can also list the unit files by type service and get a different view of the same information. We were thinking of taking it back to the basics a little bit. One of the other ideas we had for early next year was, what does the fork command do? What are the Linux processes? How do they interact with each other? You call it once, it returns twice. Some of the timing around that, and just sort of get into some basics of maybe some system programming stuff or some lower level capabilities. So for those that are more experienced, what do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people kind of lose sight of the fact the ability to automate Linux, right? And if you're an IT person or security person, there's a lot of things you can do that are very basic, but very effective at making your day easier at work, right? It doesn't necessarily involve, the high-end GUI stuff. Obviously the web console is very, very helpful. But if you're not in that environment where you have access to Red Hat 8 or you're in another Linux environment, there's lots of things.
Or you're remoting in with nothing but a terminal.
Right, if you just
access.
SSH in. There's a lot of stuff you can do with Linux that really isn't that easy to do in a Windows environment or even a Mac environment.
I would agree. I mean, Mac for me, without the brew system, I would just be ripping my hair out because I need these commands that I'm very used to. It reminds me of the free BSD ports capability they have. So we're going to set up a LAMP stack. I'm going to show you how to install some additional packages here. So I'm going to create a web server, MariaDB server, as well as MariaDB. And this will take a second or two to do that. The next command is interesting. So when I enable this service, that -- now means also to make it permanent. So there used to be an enable and a start command set that you had to do. So dash dash now just makes it one command. So it'll both enable it and start it for you. So let's
So your LAMP stack in this case is your MariaDB server?
correct. That is
Okay.
the upstream
Okay.
fork of MySQL. The company behind MySQL was not, I guess, community friendly, so there was a split. So that dash now on the system control command for enabling a service, that was actually recently introduced in RHEL 7 as well. So it's not exclusive to RHEL 8, it's just a shorthand thing to both enable and start a service. And you'll see that it creates symlinks. So it links the user lib systemd, the RHEL standard stuff, to the etc systemd where it's active. So you'll see various things starting up here. And then you can check the status of these systems and these services and see if they're running. So we can do that as well. So the workshop is very explanatory. The text goes into some of the reasons why and why you're seeing what you're seeing and what the implications of that are. So we can control systems and services here. Just reading through some of this stuff. There's some cheat stuff. We can go ahead and create, or configure our web service. Let me do that real quick. And that edits the file to help the out-of-memory killer service determine if it needs to wipe you out. So -1000 says never kill this, and then restart always if it fails. So we can go ahead and reload this. And we'll see that we're back up and running with the new configuration. Talks a little bit about this. You can edit the configuration of a service, so it's not going to commit the changes right away. And here we're going to add some capabilities, so there is no real content here, so I'm just going to sweep and copy this. Now if I look at the configuration for MariaDB, I'll see that at the bottom here, the changes that I made, the overrides, are now available. The main content of that file was copied from the user lib directory. And if I do a status on it,
See if it works.
I'll see that it's running. And when you do the edit for the system control of a unit, it actually does restart it for you. So all of the exercises in the workshop do have links to additional information. They'll link you to the Red Hat documentation. Again, if you have access to AWS and you want to set up the full workshop, you can run sort of the chain back where, I forked from Ted forked from the upstream guys. They're currently working on getting this onto AWS. I don't know if it's 100% right now. I know there's still some effort around it to get it to that point, so your mileage may vary. Firewall D has been there in RHEL 7. It's the firewall command. There was some updates to it. And then the next thing is the net filter tables. So it's a replacement for IP tables.
Yeah, before you get into that, one thing I've found about if you make a change with Firewall D, often you have to also go into SE Manage to have SE Linux or change the context of whatever you're running so that it will let something go through that port that you're enabling.
Really?
I've had to do that a couple of times.
If it's not a standard port, yeah.
Yeah, I was doing non-standard ports. And so I had to tell SE Linux that, I've let this through the firewall lets it through, but then SE Linux stops it from running because, hey, you didn't tell SE Linux that it could do it this way.
Interesting.
So you have to do that too.
So we can go into the firewall stuff. The Berkeley packet filter, that's new, and it's actually labeled as Tech Preview, so I'm not sure if it's 100% supported yet. It was Tech Preview with version 8 of RHEL. I don't know if they changed that in 8.1. So Tech Preview features are really there for feedback and solicitation of information from users. They're not supported, so it's really use at your own risk. And if you ask any questions about it, they're going to say it's Tech Preview. We don't really answer questions. I might skip some of the firewall stuff and go to the app stream, because the app stream is something that is new with RHEL 8. So,
Okay, go to upstream.
so again, at the top of these workshops, you're going to see, connect to a certain named system. You're going to connect to your virtual machine, and then these check host.
Since it's new,
scripts
do you
will
want to
fit.
talk a little bit more about AppStream and what it's about and what it does?
Sure, because the actual workshop gets into that, but essentially, I mentioned this earlier, when you are using RHEL, it has a very long shelf life, but we don't change the delivered packages over the course of that. And by what I mean by that is that we do patch, we do security updates, but there is a need within RHEL to maintain both application binary interface compatibility and application programming interface compatibility. So if you write a program that ran on RHEL 6.0, when RHEL 6.9 is released, your program should still compile and run. None of the libraries are going to prevent that from happening because we jumped to the next release or changed some binary interface or some function within a library. We will change those interfaces if we have to, so when there's security issues that are identified or other mitigating factors that require a change to be made, we will make those changes, but we try to minimize that as much as possible. It's very important to maintain compatibility going backwards on any major release. There's no guarantee of compatibility between major releases, so if you're going from 7 to 8, there are going to be differences. But within the 8.x release stream, your program should run fairly consistently across the entire lifespan of that, which is, again, 10 to 13 years. Well, folks were not happy with that, so they were installing databases or web servers, and they want to get a more recent version of that. In prior releases, we had the Red Hat Software Collections Library, where we would allow you to install in special directories newer versions of things like web servers and databases and other technology. This sort of incorporates that into the main capabilities within RHEL 8. So RHEL 8 has an application stream repo channel that includes multiple releases of various products, and we keep that up to date. So you'll get newer releases of Postgres as they come out. They'll be available to you. And then the base OS is the one that's going to maintain the compatibility with the packages. So it allows you to install newer features or capabilities on the system without necessarily breaking things that expect a certain API or ABI interface. And you'll see how that works. So it also introduces this concept of modules. So modules are also kind of new. They're a way to, it's an alternative way to do installations, and it allows you to sort of move things. Let me look at this real quick. So we're going to do a Yum module list and see what we offer for PostgreSQL. So clear this. So there's a couple of things on here. You'll notice that there's 2 versions of Postgres that are available. There's a client version of Postgres and a server version of Postgres for 9.6. The server is the default. So if I install Postgres and I specify 9.6 as the version that I want, it's going to actually install just the server component for Postgres. I would have to actually ask for the client or separately install that. But the other thing here is on the second column, which version of Postgres is the default, and the version that's the default is 10. So it's going to install the most recent version of Postgres. However, you can change that behavior. So that's discussed here. So let's go ahead and we'll do a yum install -y PostgreSQL server. And it's going to pull 3 packages and set them up. And you'll see that it installed version 10. now it wants me to go to a different system. We're gonna do this on the same system, so I'm gonna try to do an install
Hmm.
of version 9.6. So module install, answer yes to all the questions, PostgreSQL 9.6 server. And it should complain. So you can't, when you have a specific version of a stream installed in your system, you can't just jump to another stream. You actually have to remove or disable one to enable the other. You can use both. I mean, you can use either one, just not at the same time. So this did complain. So what we can do is if we go down here, I have to remove the one that was installed. So let's do a yum module remove. And this is where, you know, carefully read what the exercises are talking about.
Hmm.
That's actually not completely gone.
Mine didn't complain at all.
You installed both 9 and 10?
No, just 10. Just,
Oh, no,
just
10.
the default.
10 will work. Then when you go and try to install 9.6,
Oh,
that's where you'll get the error.
okay. Wouldn't you expect that?
So with the RHEL software collections library, you could install 2 versions simultaneously. So with app streams, you can't switch. You have to either go with one or the other. So let's so we removed the module. There's an additional step here. I'm trying to find where it is to get rid of it. So you got to disable it as well. So, or not disable. Disable would prevent anyone from installing it. Let me find the command. So removal. Maybe I did do it. Let's see if I can install 9.6 now. Oh, reset, that's it. So the command you need to use, you can remove it, and then you need to reset PostgreSQL. So that allows you to then install alternate versions. So now, if I try to install 9.6, oops, it'll work. So now I have 9.6 as my installed version. If I scroll back here, I can actually list these things so I can see exactly what I have. So yum module list rep. And there's a couple of things you'll see here. So Postgres is enabled. The server, the I means it's installed. The server would be the default thing that would be installed if you said just install Postgres. PostgreSQL 10 is the default. It's not enabled, and the server would be its default. So you can also disable things. So if there's specific things you don't want people to install, if you have applications where you don't want to enable their installation, you can go to yum module disable and name the app streams that you want to turn off. So I don't want any version of MySQL installed on these systems. So I'm going to prevent that from happening. And then if I say yum module list and look for MariaDB and MySQL, you'll notice that there's X's here. These are now disabled streams. You can't install these. The defaults would be 10.3 for MariaDB and 8.0 for MySQL, and the default installations would be the server, but those X's mean it's not allowed. So if I try to install it, it says already installed. It's kind of weird. So give me an error. That's because I installed it on this machine earlier. Now if I try to install it, it says error, unable to find a match. So once you disable it, it's not going to remove what's already running or already installed, but it will prevent installations going forward from that point. So the reason I got that weirdness there is I'm doing this all on a single machine. If if you read the instructions, it says switch between node 2 and node 3. You'll see different virtual machines. So like I said, 95% of this is going to work just working with a single VM. However, you are going to get into some just things you have to think through when you're doing that. Then there's some instructions here on how to use these same module commands and support for modules within the Ansible playbook. So you can actually do a lot of this through Ansible scripting as well. Right, Podman, Buildah, and Skopeo, these are talking about the Open Container Initiative. So Docker came on the scene and did some pretty cool stuff with containers and instantiating processes and attaching features from the kernel to them to give them sandbox behavior, things like that. We also saw CoreOS had something called Rocket. Other folks had different ways of representing containers. So the Open Container Initiative was a desire to have standardization around the definition of containers, how they're represented as tarballs, how they're represented as on the file system, how they're shared, and how they're instantiating commands around them. So that is a standard now. Nearly every container implementation is using run C as the container runtime, so it's fairly consistent across all the different Linuxes. Podman, Buildah, and Skopeo came out of the container runtime interface for OCI containers, so CRYO. The reason there is we wanted to have a installation of support for containers that didn't require you to have a daemon. So these you can actually do builds of containers as an unprivileged user. You can have a local container repository or registry where you're storing your images, and then you can push them upstream to like Quay or Docker Hub or wherever. So you don't have to be root necessarily to run some of the tooling. You don't have to have a daemon running in the background. So Podman, Buildah, and Skopeo they overlap in functionality in some regards, but they're going to behave like the Docker command would behave. So instead of doing a Docker build with some options, you can do a Buildah build. Buildah is named the way it is because Dan Walsh, who was one of the principal engineers behind this stuff, is from Boston, and that's how he says Buildah. So, and I'm not sure where Skopeo came from or what. A lot of the naming of projects in the open source space, there's some care taken because it is a global effort, and you don't know what's offensive in different languages. So they are a little careful on how they pick names for these things. So we can walk through some of these if you guys want to. I do have something here for you that unfortunately won't share outside the session. Let me look at a look at here. So I am running. I should probably put this up somewhere. So I am running a very simple Python web server. Let me actually pull this one. Yeah, I'm not sure what I did with that, but there it is. Where I'm going to give you the ability to pull the images that you need. So if I look here, you're going to have 3 images. The reason we're doing this, normally to pull the Red Hat images from the Red Hat registry, you have to have login credentials to it. So you have to be able to present a token in order to access the images that we provide that are hardened. So the assumption is that folks doing the workshop wouldn't have that ability. I have tarballs for these things, and then I ran a simple Python web server. It's not complicated, and it basically lets you grab these. So if you guys want to do that, in order to pull the images, it's on the Mosaic Lab. Yeah, it's on the Mosaic Lab network right now. So it's my Mac basically allowing you to do this.
All right. What is the
10.0.1.1.2.3, is that right?
Yeah. So let me do this. Let me do Podman remove images all. So I'm gonna get rid of all these images. Podman images. And the command you're gonna type, let me
Did it get all?
as easy as possible, is you're gonna say, it's this cheap Podman registry. So you're gonna say curl HTTP, not HTTPS, whatever that address is.
What is the address? I can't read it.
Yeah, I'll touch it in a second here. I'll tell you in 1 second. So it's gonna be curl dash capital
Oh, curl dash what?
O, capital O,
Okay.
and then it's gonna be HTTP : and for this today, and the address signed to my Mac, it's gonna be 10.0.1.1.2.3. And then the file you wanna grab, and it's just the one file you have to grab,
First grab the one.
just grab that one file, is the cheat dash podman, Podman dash load registry.sh. And then if you run that,
Cheat dash,
yeah, it's up on the screen, cheat podman load registry.sh. If you run that, it's gonna pull those images.
I need help. Read it to me, because I can't read it. Cheat dash podman.
Cheat dash podman, Podman dash load registry.sh.
LOAD registry?
Yeah, LOAD registry.
All one, registry's one word?
Yep, load
Oh.
registry's one word.
Okay,
.sh, and then hit enter. That'll pull the script you need,
gotcha.
and the script will be correct with all the IP addresses that are embedded in it, and then you just run that script using // and-
Okay,
and you'll see that I pulled the images. So now if I say, clear Podman images, I have the 3 images in my local image repository.
ooh, permission denied, gotta make it executable.
Oh yeah, you gotta make it an executable, sorry. Yeah, you'll need to do the chmod, plus X.
Right.
plus X. So it looks like this. For those following along at home. And then you should be able to run that. So those are the
There we
images
go.
that are in my registry. Well, I'm getting broken pipe errors. I guess you guys are trying to hit me all at once.
We crashed your
My
network.
simple.
It's like, no. No to you.
Hold on, let me restart it.
I'm done. Mine installed.
Oh no, mine's like broken pipes everywhere.
Try it again. Just run that script and it should grab it.
I sucked all the bandwidth out of the room.
Getting Podman command not found.
Oh, did you run the Ansible prep script?
Oh. Let's see, connection refused. Hold on here, I failed error pulling. Yeah, I do have a problem.
Let me look at the step-by-step instructions and see what I skipped.
So the step-by-step instructions aren't the ones you're gonna follow. This is sort of my homegrown thing here, but I have, let me look at my run web server here, so I'm telling it, I get the actual Wi-Fi IP address, I substitute that into the script, and then I do sudo python 3 HTTP server bind to all addresses on port 80, so that should work.
Looks like it's not recognizing the file names ubi.tar, manifest.json.
They're there. Let me make sure they're readable.
Is it all in that same directory?
Everything's in that directory. Wherever you run that Python script, it offers that directory.
Okay.
So
Maybe do this old school way.
they're readable world. Like there's no. So that is the. And all you should have to do is pull that cheap Podman. There you go. You guys are pulling something out.
Yeah, I just did recursive against your directory.
Okay, you're looking at everything.
I got a Red Hat 7.tar HTTPD 24-Red
Yeah,
Hat
you
7.
should have 3 tar files. That's really what you need.
Okay.
So if you pull the tar files like that,
Hmm.
you can actually
And a
import
UV
them.
tar.
Yeah, it's so UBI, that's something worth discussing. So that's the universal base image. So a lot of folks are building container images using alternative OSs because of, they can't freely distribute RHEL or share those binaries. So we recognize that's an issue because people want base layers they can trust. There's such a so universal base image is a subset of the RHEL packages that are freely redistributable. So when you build a container using a universal base image, you can put that up on Docker Hub or Quay and share that with other folks. There's no implied price model or subscription requirements around that.
Okay.
If you have a subscription, then you can add additional packages to your universal base image. So it gives you the flexibility of, in an environment where you do have access to our updates and patches, you can do more. But the UBI does provide some basic Yum capabilities. There's also a UBI minimal image that's very small, and it uses a package manager called micro-DNF. So you can actually install additional packages onto the UBI minimal image with micro-DNF. You're not going to have everything. You're not going to be able to set up a graphical user interface, right? There's a lot of stuff that's just deleted or not available. But it's intended to meet those specific use cases where people want something as thin as possible when they're building a container image. Maybe they want a very lightweight service they're going to run, and they don't want something that's hundreds of megabytes in size. They don't need all that. So one way you can do this, if you pull the tar files directly, is you can do a Podman load -I and the name of the tar file, and it'll actually load the image into your local registry.
Podman load -I.
Podman load -I and then that tar file if you pulled the tar file. So he just pulled the whole directory. And
I like that.
Yeah, let me see, I gotta find it. What's the name of the tar file?
if you downloaded it, so if you ran that script, they're not going to be on your system because the script pulls them to standard in, standard out, and then unpacks them as part of the pipe and installs them.
Oh,
You can download those tar files directly if you
oh, yeah, the script ran successfully this time.
Right, so if you do a Podman images, you should see the three images, like on the screen here. You should see that output. One's 329 megs, one's 215 megs.
Yeah, it's
one's
working.
8. Yeah, it's working. Okay, so you can go ahead and instantiate these things. This does, the Podman
Okay, what do I need to do?
lab is actually pretty cool. It'll go through
The
some of the
Podman?
different commands that you can do with this. So let's take a look at this. So if I clear this and say Podman info, talk to me, you're going to notice there's a couple of things that show up here. So under my stores, so here's where I'm storing my containers. I have 0 containers running right now. There's nothing that's actually instantiated. But for images, I have 3 possible images that I've pulled down. If I do Podman images, and I can say Podman, and I think that the command is tag. Look at this real quick. So pull these. So a lot of the pooling is not going to work. I can tag this image and say, I'll call it my favorite. So something to notice here. So HCV 24 RHEL 7, I tagged it also and gave it the my favorite name. You'll notice that the image ID in the third column is identical. It is the same image. It's only represented once in the file system. There's just multiple names associated with it. So a tag is both the name of the image as well as the version. If you don't assign a version to it, it gets latest by default. There is some nuance around latest. Latest doesn't always mean the newest. Latest could be the one that was not given a specific version. So be careful when you're trying to use latest.
Where does the image ID come from? Is it sort of similar? Is it like a SHA hash similar to the way Git operates?
So this gets into the weeds of containers. Containers are made up of multiple files. In fact, I would actually recommend a great resource to drill into that topic.
Right.
If
Yeah.
you go to learn.openshift.com,
Okay.
Scott McCarty, who goes by the Twitter handle Father Linux, is a humble guy.
Just saying.
Yeah. This third course right here, Subsystems, Components, and Internals, is awesome. If you click this, this will drill into the nuts and bolts behind the scenes of how containers actually work on a Linux system. Totally demystifies the whole topic. So a couple of key takeaways. We're a little off topic here, but it's a good thing to talk about. There's different topics you want to talk about: images, registries, hosts, orchestration, as well as what it means to run containers. So the different technology that's available when you instantiate things. So there are container engines, container hosts, and the kernel. The kernel has no concept at all of what a container is. It has a bunch of features and abstractions that you can use to affect functionality that creates the concept of a container. So when you instantiate a container, several things happen. The API or the command line interface you're using is going to, through the container engine, create file system entries for your container. Every layer in your container is going to get actual file system entries on the host. They're going to be marked read-only. There's going to be an SC Linux context assigned to them. And then the container engine is going to create this massive JSON configuration file of all the features that need to be flipped on in the kernel for your container, other information the kernel may need. The container runtime uses that, interacts with the kernel, and creates the process that's your running container, that's accessing the file system, things that were created by the container engine, and has all these constraints put on it: control groups, SC Linux policy, namespaces, all of these things that give you the illusion that you're running an isolated process on your box. So it's similar to how virtualization would treat things, but containers are running as another process on your host. They do have some special constraints and things assigned them through using features of the kernel. And when I say that's a big configuration file, it really is. So one of the things you can do when you define your container is you can put constraints on what kernel API calls that process is able to make. So I can have a running container that cannot use, I'm trying to think of the function that lets you create devices. You can actually prevent that from running. So your kernel, your container won't, your process won't be able to create any new devices when it's running on the host. There's a bunch of constraints you can set through the seccomp capability, so you can tell it you're restricted in what you do. This is a really actually great course if you're interested in this and you want to go deeper into it. So it does get into the weeds of how containers are actually running under the hood in the context of Linux. So I found it pretty useful. I did this at a Red Hat event. Scott actually was hosting it. So if that's something you're interested in doing, learn.openshift.com uses a service called Katacoda, so it actually creates virtual environments for you. You get both a web interface as well as a command line interface, and you can interact with the system using only a browser. So it's a great way to learn more about a product like OpenShift without installing anything or setting anything up and having to configure anything. So here we tagged our image. This gets back to Mark's question. So the image IDs are going to be the same because it's the same image. There's just two names associated with it. I can go ahead and remove an image. So it's kind of weird that I made you pull these and then just blow one away. So And this also brings up another topic. If I say RHEL 7.5 is the image name that I want to remove, but I don't give it, where it's located, and I don't specify the tag, these commands will use a bunch of defaults. So it will assume you mean latest if you don't give it a specific version. It'll assume the closest matching
Yeah.
name in your repository if you don't tell it a specific one, and then it goes ahead and removes that. So if I look at my images now, I only have 3 images instead of 4. Technically, I have 2 images because the one's gone.
It's literally RM'd like the basic command RM.
Well,
So-
RMI is remove image.
Yes, I mean, I'm looking at the similarity there.
So we can go ahead and run.
So
something.
RMI, besides removing, unlinking the file where the container, content is, it's also writing to Podman's metadata saying RHEL 7.5 doesn't exist anymore,
Yes.
as far as Podman is concerned also.
And I
Yeah.
think that's in the context of you. So if you look at this, you're going to have some hidden directories in your home that are where these things are being stored. So they're not necessarily global. Because there's no daemon involved, each user can have their own local copy of images that they're working with, and then they can push them to the registry that's shared by other folks if you want to have sharing of images. So
Well, that's both reassuring and good to know,
yes,
because everything you do is local.
that's my understanding. So if I run this image, so if I say run the UBI image, and then it's going to give me a bash interface, I can actually run some commands here. So it's going to say hello world. That's not that interesting, but quite a lot actually happened there. So if you think comparing this to a virtual machine, if this were a virtual machine, I'd have to power it up, wait for the BIOS, wait for grub, boot the kernel, pivot to root, launch all the services, then finally run the application. This command simply just ran that command in this isolated context as a separate process.
That's interesting, because it is the Podman command that's doing the hello world, because you don't have a semicolon in between the UBI and the echo. Otherwise, you would have
So
the
let's-
bash command echo hello world, and it'd be like nothing,
Yeah, so let's
Yeah.
be a little careful. So Podman is a container engine. So when I say Podman run UBI, I'm telling it I want to run the container image called UBI. So Podman is going to pull that image from
Yeah.
my local store. It's going to set up file system entries for that image, because it's going to run as a process. It's going to create a massive config.json file. It's going to pass that to the runc command that is the container runtime. Runc interacts with the kernel to create a process for this container.
Dumb question, is that a cryo thing?
Runc is pretty standard now.
Yeah.
Like with Docker, it would be a little different. The Docker command line would interact with the container D or one of the daemons that would eventually talk to runc and do all the same stuff. So runc is going to take this big configuration file, and it's going to do a different system call than fork. It's going to do a system call called clone, which has a whole lot more options to it, but essentially you end up with the same thing. You end up with a process running that has control groups associated with it, has a Linux policy associated with it, any other sort of features in the kernel that are associated with it, that has nothing to do with Podman or runc anymore. All Podman did is set up the file system entries, tell runc what the configuration is, and then runc fork the process or clone the process. So this is actually still running. Even though it issued a hello world, I haven't gotten rid of the resources that were allocated for this process. So if I do a podman ps AQ, I'll see that this thing is still running. I think there's a way to get more.
What's the syntax again? Podman what?
Do podman ps-a.
PS-A. And that's not your bash PS command, that's your Podman argument.
PS command, yeah. technically, if you did a PS, you should see the container. It's just going to have a weird sort of, it's a process on the system. Like the container is actually a process on your system, so it's going to have a different representation. Now this
Sure.
so this isn't running any longer, but you'll see that there's a container ID associated with it, which means there's still resources allocated on your system for this processing. It's basically the file system components are still there. And then it has what the command was that you ran when you executed this. So I can get rid of that. I might want to clean that up. If I look at my Podman info, you'll see that my container store, there's one container, because we had one running, right? So we had a container instantiated and it was running. And you'll see that the image store is 2. So there's 2 images and one was actually instantiated. And then the graph root is where the temporary file systems are being held for this. So we could actually go there, like if I don't know why it keeps doing this, I don't care for what it touches. So I can just push over to KeyLUG containers storage. Let's just do a recursive descent here. So that container ID, I can probably find it. Let me see what that was. So this E4D99, here's the directory where that is. It's in overlay containers. So if I go to overlay containers, so there's actual files here. This is the file system content that would have existed for that guy. So, and then he's also combining another container with them. There's multiple things going on here. So if I look at, I go up here, I do a Podman images. So when I instantiated my UBI container, it had some information specific to it, but it was also using the UBI images as well. So these would be represented in another location in that same directory, and then you're using a graph driver, so you're collapsing all of those layers to get sort of one file system view in your process as well. So there's quite a bit going on behind the scenes. I think the most important thing to understand, whether you're using this or the Docker command, because Podman, Skopeo, and Buildah are really replacements for what you would be doing with the Docker command. At the end of the day, it is just a process that's running on your system. It's a clever way of creating processes to run on systems that appear to be sandboxed from each other and have these features and capabilities, but at the end, they're just processes. So one question that comes up is there overhead in running containers? The answer is really no. You know, if I ran MySQL on my host, and then I ran MySQL as a container on my host, both of those are MySQL processes running on my host. One has additional things attached to it. It's got control group limitations and SE Linux policy limitations, but there's no virtualization layer that it's going through. It's not using emulated hardware or anything. It's running as fast, or it's accessing the same hardware and kernel that my non-containerized database would be using. The only difference is that there's namespaces involved and other features in the kernel. So I'm not going to go through all the exercises here, but
Sure.
if you run through the Podman stuff, it does get into that stuff where you can do things like this. So this command right here is pretty interesting up on the screen. I want to do some diagnostics of a container, but I don't have the commands in my container to do those diagnostics. One command I'm missing is the IP command. So I have no way to check what my address is or my routes or anything like that. So what I can do, and this is true of Docker too, I can do what are called bind mounts. So I'm saying mount user sbin on the host to user sbin on my container, mount user lib64 on my host to user lib64 on my container, run this UBI image, and run that command. So what that image is going to do is look to my host's installed commands and be able to run that command, even though that command doesn't exist.
You're letting it temporarily borrow this command you need it to use,
Exactly.
but only for that amount
Well,
of time that you need it.
Because this command is
Yeah.
gonna run and exit, this container is gonna exit too, so it's not gonna continuously run. So you wanna be a little careful using bind mounts, and this text does talk about, be a little careful using bind mounts.
So it's, by nature though, I understand that it's not persistent. Once it exits, it's gone. The binding is gone.
Correct. So that's actually a good question. I'm not sure if it is. And the reason I say that is that this is gonna allocate file system entries for this
That would be a
container.
security question because you can see the implications.
The process exits, but the file system things are
Right.
still there.
If you
So-
still have this hook sitting in there somewhere, that's a possible exploit.
So if you look at this on the run, there's an option --rm.
Yeah.
This cleans all that up once the container exits. Or you can do it directly yourself. You can do a Podman RM and get rid of the stuff that was running as well. So there's a couple of ways. We introduced the RM flag to our Podman command to do this. There's also a Podman, I think, remove command that removes the file system entries once
Yeah.
you no longer need that container any longer. But these allow you to do bind mounting, and then you'll notice that these devices have weird names. So under the hood, and it's very implementation dependent. I'm not sure exactly how Podman is creating these network namespaces and how they're representing the what it thinks is its own Ethernet interface, but it's actually going to map to something on your box. So the way that OpenShift does it, which I'm familiar with, is the virtual Ethernet. So you create these virtual Ethernet pairs. One gets the name ETH0 inside the namespace for your container. The other one is called VETH with some weird name that the kernel knows about. So, and then it just, anything one sees, the other sees. So that's how it does the networking between the container and the host.
Oh, so it's internal bridging, sort of software-defined
Yeah,
networking
it's
for
it's
itself.
like yes.
Yeah.
But there's actually, with Open vSwitch, there's actually bridges that are defined. I mean, it gets quite complicated when you get into all the networking support for the containers running in something like OpenShift. But this is the device that it thinks it has, but this is actually a virtual thing that's mapped to something else. So, but if you don't have the IP command, you can temporarily use bind mounts to let you do troubleshooting of containers for commands that are missing in the container. So it's very useful.
Yeah.
And then you can go ahead and eliminate things. So like if we run this command, let's get over here. It's going to run it and it's going to clean up. So if I say podman ps-a, I only have that UDI command I ran a long time ago. I don't see my cat at Skopeo because I use the --rm option to get rid of all the file system entries for it. There is some ways to clean up everything. So if you have any running containers and you want to get rid of them, you can just do a podman kill all. You can also do a podman remove all, and that just deleted that. Now if I do a podman ps-a, there's
It's interesting, you run, like I run the Podman ps-a, and it runs the Hello World container. It says its status is exited. And the standard system PS command, if something's exited, it wouldn't register in a PS
right, it wouldn't
listing.
show up, but
Right.
this is telling you.
So it's reading the Podman
process
metadata
has
at this
exited,
point.
The process for the
Yeah.
container instance is exited,
Yeah.
but the file system entries are still there. Because it still has allocated space on your system for that container image when it instantiated it.
So it's kind of messes with your mind about the meaning of PS in this case.
It does, like
Yeah.
it's basically saying that it's there, it's no longer running.
Right.
But
So it's not a traditional use of what people are used to with PS.
Which also means there might be, depending on the namespaces that are defined, there might be other resources that are in use. It might have a virtual Ethernet pair, it might have other things that are still existing.
Or it's saying PS, there are PIDs out there that this thing is connected to that are still alive. Maybe they're
Or there's
Yeah.
probably, there might be proc entries for it, even though it's not actually running. So it's kind of a weird.
Yeah.
I agree. It's something to to really try and understand. But like I said, you can kill all your running containers, or you can
Yeah.
name them. You can remove all the resources they're using, and then you can check, and it's all cleaned up. Yeah, it does get a little odd. The other one I want to show you guys, so Buildah is kind of neat. I'm not going to actually run a whole bunch of commands, but we can talk about some of these things. So if I click on Buildah and Skopeo. So I'm not 100% sure why all this functionality was separated. I'm sure there's good reasons for it. A lot of this was just basically in the Docker command itself when you use Docker. Buildah, you can do things like this. You can say Buildah, pull some image, and let's start with that. So what that's going to do is it's going to allocate space locally for this image that it pulled, and it's going to give you the name of the container it's now working, your working container. Now you can do stuff. You can actually mount this. You can tell Buildah, mount this at this directory. So let's see if they do that right here. So mount this container, and now I'm able to actually, it'll return where it just mounted this on the file system. So it'll say, all of the content from this image is now available at this location. I can go to that location and start doing stuff. I can just start running commands, I can do whatever I want. So what this allows you to do, which is kind of beyond what you could do with a Docker file, is sort of a thing that's read and executed. If I have subscriptions to upstream Red Hat content, I can actually do yum installs and set the install route to that path, and then it installs those packages there without having to have all the registry stuff there, the yum configuration, all that stuff. It doesn't have to be there. I can just directly install into.
And that's accessible then at that point to that container.
Right, because you mounted it, so you're able to see into it, and you're also doing this as an unprivileged user. You don't actually have to you don't need to be root in order to do this. That's one of the other features that Buildah created, was the ability to do container creation as an unprivileged user. This is showing some of the other stuff here. Let's see. Skopeo lets you inspect images, and Skopeo will let you copy images. So if you have something in your container storage and you want to send it up to Quay or Docker Hub or something, this is the command you would use to do that. You could also copy to a tarball representation. There's a lot of things you can do with manipulating images. So, just seeing what this is doing here.
Looks like Skopeo gives you more details about, so if you wanted to do Podman, I forget what the syntax is, list ls, whatever the image is. Skopeo inspect gives you like the details of that image that the Podman command wouldn't give you.
Yeah. One of the things to note too is using this stuff within RHEL 8, so this was really simplified quite a bit. These tools did exist in RHEL 7, but you couldn't do non-root builds. There were some restrictions. There were some files you could create to enable those capabilities. They weren't getting installed as part of the packages that were being installed. So with RHEL 8, I think it's yum module install container tools, and that will actually install the things that you need to do Buildah, Skopeo, and Podman. So they simplified this quite a bit in enabling that tooling. And there is no agents involved. There's no daemons involved. So you're really just, Podman is going to use the runc executable to do the clone, to set everything up and give you a container that's running.
It almost seems like the selling point of containers, one of them is so much of this can be done in user space, unprivileged. You don't need to have privileged access, which gives you the potential to wreck so much else onto the base system just to do something, including update, your own container. That's huge. because that's like a guardrail around a user, has a lot more freedom and without risking breaking something for somebody else.
And it's a good point too. Like running privileged containers, you got to really think about what are you doing. Like
Yeah.
if you're running something as root, if
Well,
something has the ability to create devices.
If you're doing it for you, what do you need? Yeah.
Yeah. MKNOD's the function, so you can prevent containers from having access to that. But if you allow them access to it,
Yeah.
they can do all kinds of stuff. They're creating node entries in the file system. They can do all
Yeah.
kinds of. So that restriction, being able to define containers in an unprivileged way and then running them unprivileged, is the value.
It's the updating them unprivileged was
One of
like
the
going
things-
into Yum, update your container.
I don't know if it's generally a convention, but on OpenShift, you can set root as the group for anything. So when you run a container unprivileged, you're given a random process or a random user ID. So it's just something randomly assigned to you. It's going to be some number like 10,000 or something. If you have files that want root access to that file, like let's say I get an image from Docker that wanted to run as root, but I don't really want to run it privileged, I can create a thin wrapper Docker file or use Buildah and simply set the group for those files to root, because the random user that's created when you run your container is always a member of the root group. Doesn't mean they have access to everything, but if you set the files that were root access only and then just let them have, group root as well, you can actually run your container unprivileged. So basically, if I download some Tomcat image where they were running it on port 80 and they were doing root activity with it, I can simply wrap that, mark whatever files I need that were more restricted as the root group, and then my unprivileged user will be able to access those, read and write to them, and do everything. So you can
Probably SE Linux control it also to help.
you can make a privileged container run
Yeah.
unprivileged. Essentially, is what you're able to do if it's just a file system issue on
So
why.
basically you're true rooting it.
Hmm?
You're true rooting it.
Sort of. I mean, it's a similar concept, but it's a different implementation. But your container user ID that's unprivileged will have access to the files it needs within the container, so it can do what it needs to do. So you can work around those issues. There's very rare cases where you want to run things privileged. Typically, I know for like on OpenShift logging and metrics collection, it needs to see all running containers. It needs a high level access to the system in order to do the log aggregation and metrics collection that it does. So it's going to need more privileges, but that shouldn't be the normal course. Like you should run as much as you can unprivileged on the system. And that's the other benefit of containers. You can run databases, you can run services, all kinds of stuff that think they're process ID 1 in the context of their container. They think they have full access to the machine, but it's all just an illusion. They're just working in their little sandbox, doing what they do. So we're at 11:35. Let's see what the other. So this gets into a bunch of capabilities around Buildah and Skopeo. So definitely take a look at those. Most of those examples should run as is. I don't think they're necessarily blocked. Terminal logging. So here's a way to do it from the command line. We can take a look at this. So I'll do the same thing once again here. I'm just going to SU as a student. Okay, your session's being recorded. So we'll list what's in the Etsy directory. We'll try to cat shadow. I get an error. I'll try a sudo cat shadow. Shouldn't let me.
Look at your bash RC ones.
Oh, they let me. Look at the bash RC.
Yeah.
It's just using the upstream or the Etsy one. It's deferring to that. There's nothing really custom here except the path. And then I exit. So I did all those terrible things and my session was recorded. So I can actually use journal control play this back. So if I, from the command line, I can look at all the records that were recorded as I did all of those commands.
And search for any specific thing that you
Yes.
did.
So it should show up, the commands that I was running. It's just not, it's scrolling off the page, they're not showing up. So let's go to, so there's a script here, I can play this back, let me do that. Shoot, log, play back. So this is showing what I did, and we can look at what that script's actually doing, but it shows me my backspaces, everything I did, every keystroke, it's all recorded.
I noticed the backspaces were recorded. That was interesting. So it must be doing some type of, keystroke capture or something.
So then I was able to sudo and dump the shadow file, and then I exit. And then I was looking at my bash RC before I left, so that's the, you can also do that from the command line. We can look at what that, Control C that. We can look at what this script is actually doing. I know there's a command shortcut for that, but. So it looks like it's KeyLUG play, and then it's figuring out what the fields are that it wants to play, so. But this is the entire script right here, it's just those 6 lines, so. So you can replay via the web console, or you can replay via the command line, so. Anybody you suspect of doing any hinky things, you can find and see what they did.
The question is, I wonder if you could see the output of. Can you do create a bash script real quick? Something to run it, then delete it.
Like as a recorded user?
Yep. And then delete that bash script and do the replay and see how it handles that deleted bash script. See if it'll show you the output of the bash script.
Like
Ooh,
a
I
bash
see.
script that actually does something? Yeah, okay, so let's do that. So let's switch to student. Okay, session's being recorded, so let me cat to test me shell. Oops.
We'll assume that this is a bash script that was already there, so we'll probably have to do this twice. You know what I mean? So if they brought it, in other words, what I'm asking is if they brought a tool onto the machine somehow and then delete that tool off the machine, do we see the output of what that tool did?
Okay, so let's do the sheet. KeyLUG playback.
You should see you creating it right now, right?
I should see all the commands, so cat, test me shell. Yep, it's all there.
Right, but in this particular instance, let's assume that you don't see the person creating that script.
Right, they just copy it to the machine and then do something.
Yeah.
You're doing
Not
forensics
Control
afterward.
D.
Yeah, is it, what I'm wondering is, does it
Yeah.
capture the actual output of a script?
Yeah.
Like in this case, we know we have it because we created it in that session, right?
So you're wondering if I copied a new script onto it.
Yeah.
So let's do
Without
that.
actually creating it in that session, right?
Right, so if I just do this on my Mac,
Copy paste, that would be a good use case to see if it captured what was pasted. I would think it would, but that would be good to confirm. And the reason I think it might is because
And then
it's
have that
going
redirect to
through
a
your
file.
standard in. Is anything that's going through your standard in would be caught.
Wow. So you don't have to redirect your file. We really want to see if it catches the output of a non-existent script. So in other words,
Yeah.
you say captures the output, so it's logging
Yeah.
your terminal session. I don't know if it's logging the
the
files.
standard out. That's what I'm wondering, if it's
Yeah, I
logging
don't know
the
if it's
standard out.
logging all the, like standard out, but if I redirect to a file, it's just gonna show me redirecting it to a file. It's not actually gonna show me what contents were
Yeah.
sent to that file. So you'd have to find that file.
Because the thing I'm
It would-
wondering is if it's just doing the standard out, okay, that's fine, I get that. But I just want to make sure it wasn't actually trying to execute that command again with the replay.
Oh.
Okay, so I copied the script to the machine. I didn't actually. So if we do that again, and I just run that script.
Oh.
I don't know why it's locked up like that.
What'd you have to do?
Can't exit password. Oh, my bad. Hold on.
The environment?
Yeah, I didn't give it like an actual command. How about if we do dash?
Does your screen execute what is being displayed in the journal control display? Because if you had, say you had a file that someone, it captured
Then
the,
delete that bad boy and then.
well, it had to capture, it captured the text of importing badscript.sh. And then it said cat badscript.sh. Now, badscript.sh is not bad right now, but then before that, you go back and you change badscript.sh to really put an exploit in it after the fact. So then when you run the journal control again,
It
then
exploits journal control.
and
That's
as
what
it
I'm wondering.
cats it out, it runs the exploit. Yeah.
Yeah, this looks like it's capturing the key.
Okay, so it's capturing the standard out and putting that into a log file.
Yeah. It's capturing standard in, standard out. Then
Yeah.
also, you notice like when I resized my terminal, in the graphical, it showed
Yeah.
the font getting bigger or smaller.
Yeah.
So it showed it,
Yeah.
you know, zooming in or zooming out. all
It's
that.
capturing the standard out because I noticed when I was typing my password, it didn't show that. So it wouldn't be standard in it was capturing, it would have to be standard out that it's capturing. Because that would,
Well,
Yeah.
right, when you type, it's echoing back
Right.
to the screen, yeah, so,
yeah.
I mean, it's showing you everything that was typed, that's a
Yeah.
good question, would it show a password being typed? Let's try that.
Mine didn't when I was showing when it captured what I was
If
doing.
it's just doing standard out, it's
Let's
not
do
gonna
like
see it
a
because the standard out's
Right.
not gonna reflect
Sudo
it.
dash
Exactly, yes. If it's capturing,
Let's do the cheat.
because
Okay.
the standard out's gonna mask your password.
Right, so if I say sudo I type something, yeah, it didn't show me anything,
Good questions.
just that I knew what I was doing. So yeah, I mean, you're right, it's not like a full-blown tripwire capability or anything like that, but it's baked into the OS, it's not,
Yeah.
you know, it's useful in that you don't have to install other stuff, or back in the day, bring a stack of CDs. One of my early consulting development jobs, I showed up at the Postal Inspection Service, and there was a desktop machine and a stack of CDs. They're like, there's Windows, there's SQL Server, there's your Visual Studio, have at it. And I had to like grind through all of that.
What's Firelog messages show in regards to that journal CTL stuff?
So let's go to Firewall.
Does it still do Firelog messages once they went to System D, journal control?
Yeah, you'll see the like the journal CTL stuff buried in there.
Okay.
Might want to do tail off.
So it is saying KeyLUG rec session. So this is the JSON file of the record that was captured, so it shows you different things.
So that's what I'm wondering, like the password for student. Does that look right? The password for student.
Password for student,
Return key.
return new line, and then I exited.
Okay, so there's no actual.
Yeah, there's no actual password.
Okay. What happens if you enter a password there? Is it saved in the JSON? I'd hope not.
No, it doesn't look like it is. Okay. It doesn't look like it's capturing that at all. Because right here it just says like,
I mean, you see what you could do with that, right? If it did. I mean, what's going on, man?
How's it going? Is it over?
just about, but
Just about. I just want to be at the end. It's funny. Still on
awesome. So yeah, it looks like it's not saving the. I'm not sure what this.
What?
Character is this /U001B. If that's like a backspace or something.
Probably. Whatever the ASCII character equivalent would be.
So the good news, though, if you want to try this, in my Git repository, there's a RHEL 8 workshop, and there's some basic instructions on how to install a single VM, a few commands you're going to run, and then a Ansible playbook that preps the workshop. And then you can go to the hands-on lab and just run through any one of these topics that you want to look at. So you can skip preparation. Preparation is kind of done for you with the Ansible script. And then there's various capabilities or features you can explore with RHEL 8. And you can sign up for a free developer's account and get RHEL 8 access, so you don't have to be, paying any subscription fees or anything like that. So, but those are all the capabilities. There's some other stuff here on Wayland. I didn't install the desktop UI, but Wayland is a replacement for Xorg, so that's it has all the Xorg roots, but it's the new compositor and graphical user interface engine. Boom, boot management. I really didn't get to explore much. That's another capability that's in there. I'm not sure what exactly is new with this. Let's see, bootloader specification. So it simplifies this. I'd have to drill into this, see exactly what it's doing. So there's other features of RHEL 8 that are included. This was meant to be a breadth, sort of comprehensive tour of what's new or different versus what was there before. NF tables, I went through that exercise. I wasn't convinced that it's simpler than IP tables. I've always thought all of the firewall command specification stuff was more of like something I'd look up, figure out what I need to do, and then forget about it until 2 years later when I had to mess with it again. But similar to bind when you create a DNS server, I've never really fully understood all the syntax or what those things mean. I just kind of do what I have to do when I need to do it. So I'm not convinced NF tables simplifies that significantly. A lot of what I do with Firewall D is actually pretty easy to do. If you need to open a port or do something, Firewall D seems to be a simpler interface to doing those kind of things. But
Is Firewall D sort of like an overlay to NF tables?
yeah, so Firewall D is really the daemon and the command line that works with NF tables on RHEL 8 to implement all that stuff.
Okay.
So they sort of go hand in hand. They're kind of the dynamic duo.
So when you enter a Firewall CMD command, what you're doing is you're invoking and writing NF tables.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Firewall, you're talking to the kernel at that point. If you're doing stuff that's
Yeah, networking.
base
Yeah.
capability and
Yeah.
I was just checking the 5P tables are still there, so I'm still good.
like, be a little careful.
They're
too.
probably both there.
Yeah, IP tables is still there. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still installed. IP tables and NF tables are side by side.
Yeah, I don't really care about anything else. I just need IP tables.
Okay.
That's what I know how to use.
So this be careful right here. Like NF tables replacing IP tables is a new subsystem of the Linux kernel. So this is baked into the kernel. Is the thing you're communicating with when you're running the NFT command. So maybe it understands IP tables syntax, but I think this is the replacement for it.
It's probably handling it the same way they do, like, if you put in an old initd command, there's a translation into the systemd counterpart, and it's a systemd counterpart that's actually executed. It could
One
be
thing-
something like that.
One thing too, Firewall command has this panic mode. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but
No.
you can query if you're in a panic, so you can say firewall command. Syntax right here, query command. It's gonna say no. So I'm not gonna do this from the SSH session, because if I put the system in panic, all connections are terminated. All firewall ports are closed. The only way to access this
Is that like virtually unplugging the Ethernet cable?
Well,
Is
if
that
I,
sort
if
of
I
a-
log in,
Yeah, what you're doing. Yeah.
if I log into the
Yeah.
command console, so this is the VM, the VirtualBox console, and I run this command, so I'm gonna go panic on. It is gonna terminate my,
You do that SSH, like you say, you've lost your connection and you can't go back because you've disconnected. And you can't go back because you've told the other end that it's not listening anymore.
so we're in panic mode right now. If
So you've taken yourself offline.
if I do anything, I'm dead.
Yeah.
It didn't even like close it, it just,
Yeah.
nothing's
Well, it's
in.
doing what's being told to do, dropping all the traffic.
So what I can do is if I say panic off, it didn't kill the session. So I have all those returns show up. They were queued.
I mean, it'll time out eventually.
Eventually it'll time out, but yeah. So I put the system into panic mode. That's just that if you're a system admin or admin, you think something really bad's going on, kill all
Wait a minute, that's an SSH session?
This is the VirtualBox console.
Oh, yeah, right,
So
okay.
this is me physically talking to.
Oh,
the
oh, right,
machine.
okay, so, yeah.
So I didn't get killed here, but
Oh,
unless you have console
okay,
access.
so you didn't do that on your SSH
No, no, this is
connection.
a TTY, but if you don't have
Uh,
console access,
Yeah,
done.
you're done, yeah.
you're done. All external
Yeah.
users, all the web sessions,
It's over with.
done.
Yeah, it's offline. Yeah.
So that's kind of a cool, and like I said, it's a query panic. And it says no. Well, let's put it into panic and it should say yes. So whether you're in panic mode or not,
But since you're on the console, you can bring it back,
I can bring it back on the console.
because you still have your command prompt.
So
Because you can
so
still
the
do all the
normal-
local stuff you want.
Yeah, if I
If
have
you're on the
console
console,
access,
yeah.
I can throw the system into panic mode and then start looking at log sessions and trying to figure out
Hmm.
what the hell happened. You know, but you have to have console access if you're in panic mode. There's no SSH. There's nothing.
Well, I mean, if you're stuck in like, if you're like DDoSing something because you've been hacked, then you shut it off and then you triage from there.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances. That's the one thing I got a better appreciation for. I was working on some Army communication systems way back in the day,
Yeah.
and they said if we're attacked, I said, "You want us to kill connection?" They're like, "Not necessarily. You might want to see what they're doing." Everything is an opportunity to learn more, so it's
Yeah.
not a
True statement.
you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's one of the things I wasn't aware of Firewall Command as well. It does have a panic capability.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's new for RHEL 8 or if that's been there for a while, but that might have been there for a while. So that's about all I had. Like I said, these labs are quite long. There's a lot of them, so it's meant to be sort of a breadth of all the features of RHEL 8. So like I said, if you start with this this directory, this is my GitHub user ID, and that's the repository. There's just a minimal set of commands. You can register for a free account that will allow you to download
Mhm.
the ISO for RHEL 8 and then set this up. 90% of the content in the labs are going to work. Some of the labs will talk about multiple machines and things like that. You have one VM you're working with, so it may not be a one-to-one correspondence, but you can typically work out what the differences are. I didn't find a whole lot of problems with it last night, but I've been doing this for a while, so other folks may find it more.
Sure. You were looking at logs, the KeyLUG exercise, session logging. Is there anything, what would KeyLUG capture that, say, journal control doesn't?
I think T-Log is really just reading.
It's what?
well, the output's just really reading out, but.
Yeah, I'm not, so the nice thing too is each lab
Yeah.
does have additional links below, so
Yeah.
you can go to the documentation
Sure.
and learn more about it, but, you know, I agree, I think session logging isn't intended to be the end all be all, but it's something that's
No.
very useful,
Yeah,
that's easy to enable. You know, it's not something that's complicated and there's a lot of configuration behind it, stuff like that, but you get something valuable right away. But you're right, Tripwire and all those other guys, they have much more feature-rich.
they do, but the problem is with Tripwire, I mean, you have to be an administrator who knows how to set it up, right? Okay, that takes time. This is much easier in that regard, you know. A level one sysadmin could probably turn on this.
You know, the other thing too is because we recorded all that stuff, we should have,
Mhm.
if I go to who's that at? Session recording, all those sessions are recorded. All those individual things we did, I can click on any one of them and replay them, so,
That's why I was asking what the console, I mean,
and then go twice as fast. Oops.
if it sends the content of that session to the server and stores it there as well, because at that point, if you did have somebody that was in the network hostile, they would have to do log cleanup in 2 spots, which is
Yep. Let's see here,
more tedious.
I'll do it twice as fast, play. So yeah, all that's available, you can zoom in, zoom me out a little bit, sorry, zoom in. Make it fit. So, I'm not sure exactly what that does, grab or not. But there's a lot here, you can search for things, and then it tells you about the recording, gives you some information about it. What the records were that were captured, so. So yeah, once you have that enabled,
Mhm.
all those sessions are being recorded, then you can filter. You can look at things since some time, or until some time, or, you know.
What's the search allow you to do? Can you search for test up in that top one and see what pops?
Interesting.
So if you knew that there was a certain command they were running, you could search for that command by session.
Yep. Yep, that had test. So
Wait, this web server, like this service that's provided by Red Hat, like that's part of, I haven't used Red Hat a whole lot, so the
yeah,
enterprise.
so this is something that's, this whole thing that I'm looking at right now is a web console. So one of the things we added as part of RHEL 8 was this web-enabled console.
The
where you could-
cockpit.
Yeah, you could do things like create a bonded interface. You know, these were complicated things to do with lots of command options and things you had to
Sure.
think about. So now it's done in a much more simpler way. The you can modify the firewall and see what zones there are. It's very graphical.
Can you see current sessions under networking? Like current connections?
Just the logs. You can see
Okay.
the logs. It doesn't look like it's gonna do all. And like I said, you know, there's more room here for things to be added, and they are adding things. One of the other things that's a little bit annoying is if I look at session recording, when I go to the configuration of it, what was that? Oh, you know what? It was under here. So see how it gives me the ability to store metrics? I had to yum install a package to make this option appear. So there may be other things you install that cause the UI to change. Like specific things you're asking for, there may be some package that enables that capability. It's just finding that in the documentation and, you know, where that would be.
It sounds like, you know, that Red Hat, you guys are kind of at a point where you're not far from building automated baselines of networks, right? So you have an understanding of what's in the network from the get-go. At a very simple level, because I mean, that's a very powerful tool for a security team to have.
Well, like the level of automation too, like with Ansible and the fact that Cisco and all those Brocade and those guys are writing modules,
Yeah.
you can start from nothing and like provision your routers, provision your switches.
Yeah, like Cisco's got
Pixie
protocol
boot all your
in place that does-
systems, set up all the packages on them, like just turnkey, churn out a data
Yeah.
center, you know?
'Cause I mean, you couple something like this with, you know, maybe a little more switch for the net session stuff, and then you add this onto like Cisco ICE. I mean, those networks are very hard to maneuver in as a hostile entity at that point. You know, if people are actually reading the data that's displayed in front of them instead of clicking.
Well,
OK.
like, you know, based on your experience with the ability to create VLANs and stuff, could you trap somebody? Could you sort of create like a,
So ICE does that automatically. So ICE will look at it. If you don't authenticate to ICE, you'll be stuck in what's called like a purgatory VLAN. So basically, it's a VLAN to nowhere, right? And it's isolated to your segment, so you don't have access to other machines that are stuck that way either. Well, a lot of that though goes back to your network admin team and how well they can set that stuff up, right? So a lot of entities don't use ICE because there's some manpower up front required to get it going, right? And that's part of the issue with it. This, though, on the other hand, seems like this, if this was a shop already running Red Hat, would have a very easy transitional time to this. You know?
yeah, the other thing too, sauce reports, it's a click.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of nice. It's a lot easier. Although it was this pretty not a complicated command anyway, but you did create a system configuration diagnostic information. There's something for SE Linux software updates. I think you can add packages through this interface. Well, there's a terminal. You can actually run commands here without having to exit the browser, so you can do a lot of the command line stuff as well. You can change how this looks too. And if I, you know, switch to student, my session's being recorded. Let's see, do something bad here. That works. Now if I go back, there should be a session that was recorded. Me being bad. Doesn't give me the same color, but it actually has all the keystrokes recorded.
Yeah.
The nice thing about that too is if they get into a file and they're editing, you can see what lines they were changing, where they were doing things, how they were trying to cover their tracks, like, you know. But you're right, if they upload a script and then it does all that stuff, you don't get much visibility into what happened.
That was my point.
Yeah. Now, would Tripwire show you those kind of things, or would it?
Tripwire, depending on how you set up, will show you what files were modified
Okay.
and when they were modified. And depending on the level of scrutiny of Tripwire, it'll show you the changes.
Yeah, I think that's beyond what session logging is intended.
Yeah. No, but this takes you into a situation where you can see that something was modified, then you can look further in Tripwire or your PAM modules
Yeah,
and
yeah.
see if you have PAM set up correctly, it'll show you the guy going on there too.
All right, we can close out if you want.
Okay.
12:05, but.